Hello, and thank you for being here. I genuinely appreciate you choosing to watch this video, and if you decide to become a subscriber, that would mean a great deal to me. Now, let's get into it. I never would have guessed that bringing up the topic of a prenuptial agreement would end a relationship that had lasted 2.5 years, including an 8-month engagement. But that's exactly how things unfolded after my then fiancée reacted to the suggestion as if I had deeply insulted her. My name is Tyler, and what follows is the story of how one discussion, intended to protect the business I built, revealed a side of the woman I planned to marry that I hadn't seen before. It became clear she already considered my financial achievements as partially hers. The story starts several years ago, in a casual setting, an engagement party hosted by mutual friends. I was 26, riding the excitement of closing on my second rental property and working in real estate development. That night, the bride-to-be introduced me to Amanda, a confident, driven 24-year-old who had recently become a licensed nurse practitioner. Amanda and I hit it off immediately. Her enthusiasm for her profession was infectious, and we shared an interest in self-improvement and traveling. We spent most of that night deep in conversation, exchanging stories about our ambitions and bucket list destinations. She asked smart, thoughtful questions about real estate, a sign, I thought, that she was genuinely curious about my work. By spring, we were officially a couple. From the beginning, Amanda stood apart from others I had dated. She seemed genuinely invested in my goals, regularly checking in on my projects and celebrating my wins as if they were hers too. When I acquired my third rental property later that summer, she insisted on taking me out to dinner to celebrate, and she picked up the tab. By the second year of our relationship, Amanda had moved into my downtown condo. Things felt stable, reciprocal, and aligned. She was clocking long hours at the hospital, and I was steadily growing my portfolio and shaping my real estate development company. We often talked about our future plans, personally and professionally. What had started as a side hustle had turned into a full-scale business. I'd gone from flipping properties to overseeing full development projects. Fast forward a few years, and I was managing 8 rentals, had completed 3 developments, and, together with my business partner Mitchell, was earning a solid 6-figure income. My net worth had grown beyond anything I had originally envisioned. Amanda often spoke proudly of what I'd built. She would bring up my work in conversations with friends and post photos of renovation progress online. Her parents were equally enthusiastic. Her father, with his own background in construction, respected the scale of what I was doing, while her mother often joked that Amanda had found herself a keeper. At 29, I felt confident it was time to take the next step. We had been together for more than 2 years, and Amanda had made it clear, both subtly and directly, that she was ready for an engagement. So on a weekend trip shortly after my birthday, I proposed. She said yes right away, and we spent the rest of that weekend dreaming up the perfect wedding. In the weeks that followed, we dove into planning. We agreed on a $35,000 budget, booked a country club for the ceremony, and mailed save-the-date cards to over 100 guests. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly. What I didn't expect was that one legal conversation, which I believed to be a practical step, would pull back the curtain on a way of thinking that not only Amanda held, but her entire family seemed to share. That conversation altered the trajectory of everything I thought I knew about our relationship. The months that followed were filled with the usual chaos of wedding planning. Amanda threw herself into it with typical determination. She curated Pinterest boards, managed spreadsheets for decor and entertainment, and had a clear vision for every detail. I paid the $8,000 venue deposit without blinking. I also covered the upfront costs for the catering and photography, while Amanda focused on the aesthetics. Both our families helped out financially, but the bulk of the expenses came from me. I didn't mind. My income far exceeded Amanda's, and I wanted the day to be special for both of us. However, I began to notice a shift in how Amanda approached financial matters. After we got engaged, she started making significant purchases without looping me in, upgrading her dress to a $2,000 designer gown, spending $800 on custom gifts for her bridesmaids, and reserving a $1,500 bridal shower at an upscale venue. When I gently asked about these decisions, she'd simply reply, "It's our big day, and we can afford it." Her language around money began to evolve as well. She started referring to my company and real estate holdings as if they were joint assets. At a family event, I overheard her telling relatives about our development plans and plans for future commercial real estate investments. None of these things were false, but they painted a picture where she was a co-owner of ventures I had launched long before we met. Her family seemed to adopt this view too. Her father, once politely uninvolved in my work, started offering unsolicited business advice. Her mother made light-hearted remarks like, "Well, Amanda deserves the finer things now that you two are successful." Although many of these comments were likely meant in jest, they hinted at an underlying belief that my personal achievements now belonged to both of us, and perhaps even to her extended family. I tried to write it off as normal pre-wedding enthusiasm, but a sense of unease began to grow. That uneasy feeling intensified during a routine business meeting. Mitchell and I were reviewing our quarterly performance when the conversation turned personal. He brought up his recent divorce and how his ex-wife had walked away with half his business and a few rental properties. He strongly advised that I consider drafting a prenuptial agreement. At first, I dismissed the idea. Amanda wasn't like Mitchell's ex, who had only shown interest in his company once things went south. Amanda had always seemed supportive and engaged. Still, his words stayed with me. In the following days, I started paying closer attention to Amanda's comments about money and the future. She'd mentioned buying another property together or how we should invest more of our earnings. When I gently reminded her that my business was a partnership between Mitchell and me, she'd laugh and say, "That'll all be ours once we're married." Her tone was light-hearted, but the message underneath left me uneasy. It felt as if she saw our future marriage as a gateway to full access, not just emotionally, but financially. And from a legal perspective, she wasn't entirely wrong. Our state views anything accumulated during marriage as joint property. Despite that, I couldn't shake the discomfort. It wasn't about distrust. It was about the assumptions she was already making. On the advice of my accountant, I set up a meeting with a family law attorney. The lawyer confirmed my concerns. Without a prenup, Amanda could be entitled to a portion of any future growth in my assets, even if she had no active involvement in the business. He cited several cases, including one where a man lost his entire landscaping company after his wife argued that merely attending events had helped elevate his profile. These weren't scare tactics, they were common outcomes. The attorney proposed a fair and straightforward prenuptial agreement. It would protect the assets and business interests I had built before marriage while ensuring Amanda would share equally in anything we created together moving forward. It even included spousal support and a reasonable division of any future property. To me, it felt like a smart, thoughtful approach, something that respected both of us. But when I finally brought it up with Amanda, everything changed. That one conversation didn't just derail our engagement, it revealed more than I ever expected about the dynamic we had built. With the legal paperwork finalized and a clear understanding of why it mattered, I waited for the right time to introduce the topic of a prenuptial agreement to Amanda. I chose a quiet evening, one free from stress or distractions, after dinner when we were relaxed and in good spirits. I explained that my attorney had recommended a prenup, considering the size and complexity of my business ventures. I framed it as a responsible and standard measure for individuals in my financial position. Nothing unusual, just prudent. Amanda hadn't anticipated the conversation. Her expression shifted to surprise, but she responded thoughtfully, asking detailed, well-considered questions about how such an agreement would work and what it might mean for our financial life as a couple. I emphasized that the prenup was designed to protect the assets I had accumulated prior to our relationship, while also ensuring that any wealth we created together after marriage would be shared equally. She listened carefully and said she'd need time to think it over and do her own research. I suggested she take 2 weeks and encouraged her to seek independent legal advice. It felt like a respectful and equitable way to proceed. After all, a prenup is a binding legal document and deserves serious reflection. I expected she might have reservations or want adjustments to certain clauses, but I believed we could come to a mutually agreeable arrangement that safeguarded both of us. During those 2 weeks, Amanda had long discussions with her family about the prenup. Later, she admitted those conversations had been emotionally taxing. Her father saw the document as a sign of mistrust, an indication that I doubted the durability of our relationship. Her mother, on the other hand, felt insulted, interpreting it as a veiled accusation that Amanda's family might be scheming for financial gain. Those opinions began to color Amanda's perspective. She started viewing the prenup less as a reasonable precaution and more as a sign that I was hedging against the failure of our marriage. What began as a logical discussion gradually turned into an emotionally fraught issue. Roughly 8 weeks before the wedding, I noticed a shift in Amanda. Though she hadn't yet given me a definitive answer, her attitude toward the agreement was increasingly adversarial. Sarcastic remarks crept into our conversations. She'd make pointed comments about my cherished business and referred to properties I owned as yours, never ours. The tension was no longer confined to one topic. It began to bleed into other parts of our relationship, casting a shadow over what should have been a joyful time. 2 weeks after that, I asked her directly for her decision. The wedding was approaching fast, and I needed clarity. Amanda arrived at the conversation composed and resolute. She told me that she had thought deeply about it, and in the end, she just couldn't bring herself to sign the agreement. To her, it felt like a betrayal, a sign that I didn't fully believe in our relationship. She likened the prenup to preparing for divorce before we had even exchanged vows. I tried once more to explain my reasoning. It wasn't a matter of doubt or lack of faith in our love. It was a practical step to shield the business I had built long before we met, to protect my business partner Mitchell from any future complications, and to lay out a clear financial framework in case unforeseen circumstances ever arose. But the more I spoke, the more hurt and defensive Amanda became. She accused me of prioritizing my wealth over our relationship, of valuing money more than commitment. In her eyes, love should be unconditional, not governed by legal terms. She saw the prenup as evidence that I cared more about what was mine than what could be ours. It was clear the discussion was quickly escalating into a confrontation that wouldn't help either of us. I chose to de-escalate. I simply said, "I understand." That seemed to take some heat out of the moment, but the core issues remained untouched. Amanda slept in the guest bedroom that night. We didn't speak of it again, but the silence between us was heavy with tension. Lying awake, I realized we had reached a fundamental impasse. Our views on finances, marriage, and shared responsibility diverged in ways that couldn't be ignored. Her refusal to sign wasn't just about the document. It suggested a belief that by agreeing to marry me, she was automatically entitled to everything I had built, even before she was in the picture. What disturbed me more was her unwillingness to see things from my perspective. I wasn't trying to exclude her from the future we'd create. I just wanted to preserve what I had achieved on my own. Her inability to acknowledge that seemed to point to a deeper divide in how we valued individual accomplishments and collective goals. By the time morning came, I had made my decision. If Amanda couldn't respect my need to protect what I had established prior to our relationship, then she wasn't the partner I could entrust with my financial future. Her reaction revealed a troubling sense of entitlement, something I couldn't ignore. That morning, she left for her hospital shift as usual. We exchanged polite words, but the emotional distance was undeniable. After she walked out the door, I began the process of calling off the wedding. The country club reminded me of their strict cancellation policy. We'd forfeit our deposit. The photographer was more accommodating and refunded most of our payment. I managed partial refunds from the caterer as well. All in, canceling the event cost me several $1,000s. Still, I considered it a necessary expense. far better than entering into a marriage that was already fractured. By noon, I had reached out to all the key vendors. Amanda was still at work and unaware of what I had done. I knew I had to tell her before she heard it through others, but I also wanted to shape the narrative myself. I wrote a short post for Facebook, stating that the wedding was being called off due to irreconcilable differences in values and long-term vision. I thanked those who had supported us and asked for privacy. I tagged Amanda so she would see it. The post went live at 12:30 p.m. Within minutes, the responses started flooding in, some supportive, others shocked. Friends reached out to check on me. My parents called shortly after. They were surprised, but ultimately stood by my decision. At 1:45 p.m., Amanda called. She was in her car, still in the hospital parking lot, shouting into the phone. She was furious, blindsided, and deeply embarrassed. She accused me of announcing our breakup publicly without giving her a final conversation in private. I responded calmly. I told her the decision had already been made, she had made her stance clear, and I had chosen accordingly. There was nothing left to debate. Amanda threatened to come home immediately to continue the conversation in person, but I asked her to stay with her parents for the night so we could both have some space. She agreed, saying we would talk again the following day once things had cooled down. The rest of the day passed in a blur of calls and messages. I reiterated to concerned friends and family that the decision was final and that I was at peace with it. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee and checked my email, the doorbell rang. Standing outside was Amanda's father. He greeted me politely and asked if we could talk. Though I was unsure, I let him in. At first, the conversation was respectful. We sat at the kitchen table just as we had during past family gatherings. He said he wanted to understand my decision and explore whether there was still hope for the relationship. I appreciated his composed tone and shared my reasons in full. He admitted that he'd taken time to learn more about prenuptial agreements and could now understand why someone in my situation would want that kind of protection. But as the discussion went on, his tone shifted. What began as genuine curiosity gave way to subtle pressure. He spoke of Amanda's love for me and how devastated she had been, how she had spent the night crying, unable to accept that everything had unraveled over, in his words, a piece of paper. He started by sharing how excited his whole family had been about the upcoming wedding. He mentioned the non-refundable deposits they'd already put down for hotels and flights, making it clear that my decision was affecting more than just Amanda and me. Then the conversation took a strategic turn. He hinted that bringing up a prenuptial agreement might send a negative message to those around us, implying it would seem as if I didn't trust Amanda, or worse, that I thought she was marrying me for my money. From his perspective, this line of thinking clashed with their family's principles and sense of honor. As he spoke, it became apparent that this wasn't merely an emotional appeal. It was a calculated move designed to instill guilt. Each argument he presented appeared crafted to make me look irrational and self-centered for wanting to protect the assets I had built long before Amanda entered my life. What was a reasonable legal precaution was being reframed as a personal attack on his daughter and their family values. Rather than directly confronting his manipulative tactics, I decided to play along. I responded with vague affirmations, nodding and saying just enough to appear agreeable while withholding any real commitment. When he questioned the need for a prenup in light of how much Amanda and I loved each other, I said, "You might have a point." When he emphasized the importance of full financial transparency in a marriage, I replied, "That's one way to see it." He left my home thinking he had convinced me that I was back on board with both the wedding and abandoning the prenup. But as soon as the door closed behind him, my conviction only deepened. That meeting helped me understand Amanda's intense reaction when I first brought up the idea. Her family seemed to believe that marrying into my life meant automatic access to my wealth. They couldn't fathom why I'd want to protect what I had earned before she was even in the picture. Her father's approach also shed light on Amanda's behavior, how she took a sensible request and twisted it into a personal slight. It became evident that emotional pressure and guilt were their tools of choice in a disagreement, not sincere conversation or mutual understanding. Had I gone through with the marriage, I would have been locked into a situation where setting boundaries was seen as an act of betrayal. The next day, Amanda reached out, asking if we could talk. I agreed, curious to see whether her father's visit had shifted her thinking. We met at a cafe that held good memories for us. She opened by apologizing for how emotionally she had reacted when I mentioned the prenup, though she still refused to sign it. She suggested compromises she thought were fair, a smaller ceremony or a longer engagement to give us time. But her focus remained on the logistics, wedding details and timelines, rather than the deeper disagreement about financial trust and independence. As we talked, I realized Amanda still didn't understand why the prenup mattered to me. She saw it only as a signal of doubt, not a prudent decision to safeguard my efforts and investments. Her proposed solution stayed on the surface, sidestepping the real issue. We held fundamentally different views on how money and marriage should coexist. By the time our conversation ended, I made it clear the wedding was off, and that our relationship had reached its conclusion. Amanda cried and pleaded with me to reconsider, but I calmly told her that our core values didn't align. She walked away thinking I was making a terrible mistake, but at least she knew my decision wasn't changing. In the days that followed, her family launched a coordinated push to get me to reverse course. Her mother reached out directly to my parents, urging them to talk me out of insisting on a prenup. Each relative echoed the same sentiment, that such an agreement was unnecessary because Amanda loved me unconditionally and would never take advantage of me. What they failed to realize was that this wasn't about doubting Amanda's love. It was about protecting what I had already built long before we met. Even under mounting pressure, I stood firm. In fact, their united front only reinforced my clarity. This was not the kind of family dynamic I wanted to legally bind myself to. Roughly a week later, Amanda had moved out of my place and returned the engagement ring. Despite everything, the moment felt surprisingly quiet, but it brought with it a certain peace. I was finally free to concentrate on my business and future, no longer weighed down by emotional pressure or family expectations. In the months that followed, I had time to reflect on everything that had unfolded. I began to understand that the prenup wasn't just about money. It symbolized the need for alignment with someone who respected my hard-earned accomplishments. Amanda's refusal to sign revealed how she perceived my success, not as something to honor, but as something she was inherently entitled to. I also became more attuned to recognizing guilt-tripping disguised as care. Had I given in to that pressure, I would have ended up in a marriage where my financial boundaries were constantly pushed. Above all, I've come to appreciate just how essential financial compatibility is in a lasting partnership. Amanda and I shared affection, dreams, and a strong connection. But our clashing views on money and personal accountability created a divide that couldn't be repaired. In hindsight, the prenup wasn't the problem, it was the turning point. It illuminated a fundamental disconnect that, if left unaddressed, would have caused greater damage later on. This experience taught me a powerful truth. Love, while vital, isn't always enough to overcome deep-rooted differences in core values. You can deeply care for someone and still acknowledge that they aren't your lifelong match. Sometimes the most respectful and caring decision you can make is to walk away, both for their sake and your own. Today, my focus is on continuing to grow what I've built and eventually meeting someone who shares my perspective on independence, achievement, and mutual respect. I haven't closed the door on marriage, but I now understand that the right partner will appreciate the need for legal clarity, not see it as an attack on trust. True love doesn't manipulate you into ignoring your instincts or send a family to pressure you into giving up your principles. What I've ultimately realized is that honoring your values, even when it's painful or costly, is one of the most empowering investments you can make in your future. And with that, this chapter of my life comes to a close.